welcome back. This is meant to be very interactive, and we want to open it up now to your thoughts. I think there was a lot of information that came from the student feedback session yesterday that is likely applicable to their thoughts on how they're judged and how the interaction with the judges goes. I did not attend that session. I was in other meetings, and I'm hoping that you guys that were in that session will share with us the thoughts coming out of that. We'll give you a moment just to get settled. Marta, I wanted to, when you do get settled, offer the first opportunity to speak to you to follow up on what you wanted to discuss when I so rudely cut you off at the end of our last session. All right, and with that, go ahead.
So do I have to answer the question?
Do you have to dance and sing? No. No, but there was something you wanted to discuss at the end. It was either a question or a contribution to an ongoing discussion, and I wanted to let you kick it off.
Okay, so what I wanted to add when people was discussing on the papers, from our experience for Eurathlon, for example, we found out that teams publish papers more or less 6 months later. You can start, they present it somewhere in a conference. In the case of Europe, we have a big kind of conference there in Forum in March, so our competition was in September, and we could see some people already doing a workshop there on their experiences, and some others show up more or less 1 year later. So maybe 1 month after, it's maybe too soon, because teams have been putting a lot of effort. Even myself, when I've been organizing, when I just arrive, I have a lot of things, I'm very tired, and if somebody tells me like, oh, you need to write, oh. So maybe if you give them a little bit more time, but I don't know if it's only undergrads, because we do it also with postdocs and people that is also industry. So they recover, and sometimes you have either summer or Christmas in the middle, and so people have some time to put together all the information they give you already a little bit before and going through their data.
I can tell you as a judge, I am so pleased when that week is over. And, we promise we will get the new rules out by September. And we say this sometime in June and July. And September comes and we're still not ready. And we finally get them out. And then next June, I seem to forget all of the pain from the past, and I'm ready to do it again for a week. So I understand the cadence of winding down after a very intense event. And I think that that's something that's open for discussion and maybe experimentation to see if there's a change in quality of what's submitted given more time or not. And it's been my observation in management that the thing that gets rewarded gets done. And if anything is worth doing, it generally will have a deadline attached to it. And so those are two important things to make them happen. Hitesh, I think there's some questions here. Who's handling the microphone? Okay. Okay. Thank you, Sherry.
Just a quick comment on that. Maybe you can do something like for here, where they have to submit an intent to participate with just 1 or 2 pages, maybe including already some previous results from the competition, and then we do a pre-selection, and then 2 months or 3 months later, they need to submit a full paper. That could maybe balance. We could have still something really close to the competition.
Almost like an abstract submission process, and then selection, and then some time, right?
Maybe already with some results, but not that it's a lot of effort, but we already have something after the competition.
Right. I think Patrick had a...
So I think I probably have more of a comment than a question here, but as a advisor, am I the only one in the room at the moment? I might be. Students hate writing papers. But students need to write papers, and they will not unless you make them. However, the amount of effort students put into the papers varies directly with how important they think it is the competition. If you want better papers, make them worth points, and make them worth points that count towards the final overall standings. Then these students will put more effort in. It's amazing actually what you can get them to do for a few points towards the final standard. I think as far as some of the timing discussions, one thing that I think would actually be beneficial to RobotX would be to have some, especially on the 2-year time frame, would be to have some of what, like Vladdy was talking about, some of the intermediate type steps. Maybe it's not a full paper, or maybe it's give us one part here, and one part here, something like that, because students work to deadlines. If
So-
they have a deadline and they have to show you that they have a design by March, they will have a design to show you by March. If you don't make them show you a design in March, that design will stretch until June. And so you can actually drive the progress of the teams, and I've seen this with some other competitions that have some more intermediate type deliverables. You can actually drive the entire competition, the teams, by requiring them to submit something on different aspects to kind of keep them on pace and keep them on track. I'll also say deliverables right after the end of competition, not going to happen. By the time we get back from these competitions, the students haven't slept for a month. The advisors haven't either. It's just not going to happen right afterwards. If you want a wrap-up paper, use this forum to do it.
Yeah.
Make it due after the fact. Use the forum and use the forum as the reward. You know, people
So,
got to come to Sydney. That's a big reward.
So I'm thinking about, and I've got a Excel spreadsheet to put up here that we'll get to. What is the value in our competition of the elements of static judging? Writing a paper, whatever the content of that paper is. I find that when I read 50 journal papers at RoboSub, that what I get is a parts list and some other information. And if it's a good paper, it's a well-written parts list. And sometimes they do answer the question of why they selected one set of sensors or integrated their system in a certain way to perform certain tasks. But it's really a parts list. And reading 50 parts lists that all pretty much have the same, kind of parts, maybe different part numbers and different manufacturers of those parts is not satisfying. But was that exercise of value to the students? Because I don't think that it's necessarily of value in delineating performance or a value system in which we're going to offer reward. And so that's one thing. We find that there is value to RoboNation for the students to create a video, a team introduction video. And some take that very literally, and it's very dry. And some take that as an opportunity for wild creativity. And they make some really interesting videos that accomplish something that later on RoboNation can use to publicize and push out awareness of this event and other events. That was one of the things that was mentioned yesterday in plenary was how do we get the message out to as broad an audience? How do we gain support by doing that? Is having the students develop a website a good exercise? And how do we evaluate that? I mean, some are really, really bad. Some are really functional. Some become an electronic archival place for all of their design legacy. And how do we, even though it has those other goodness measures, how do we create a metric around that year's competition that includes a component of a website? What are some of the other things that we include in our static judging? Oh, the students do an oral presentation. I think there's tremendous value in standing up in front of a group and speaking about something you should know well, even if you're uncomfortable doing it, because that's one of the things in engineering that ABET accreditation wants to see. And all of the schools have to meet those standards, and this is another experiential learning activity for the students. Does that speak to the quality of their entry in the competition, meeting the objectives of the competition? These are the kinds of questions I would like to discuss. And while we're having that discussion, and I'd like to stay on topic on that discussion, I will pull up a static judging score sheet that has rubrics in it. And then I want to share that with you maybe after 20 minutes of discussion, if that's okay. All right. Who wants to go first?
I have one comment about
Okay.
the paper,
Yes.
the writing paper. I think it's really important clearly for students to write papers, but and we should facilitate them to write them. But it's also important to convince the faculty advisors to see this competition as an additional opportunity, because usually from the faculty at the university, they say, why should I send my students to go there? That is an important thing to universities, to write paper, essentially. So if we do that in a structured way, that we will give the possibilities to students to write journal paper, real journal papers on some special session, for instance, on some good journals, can be also a push to the guys on the university. Says, okay, I will send my students because at the end of this experience, they will learn clearly hands-on experience and so on, but we have also some research output. So that's that could be another point of view.
The thing I was thinking about the paper, and I've really struggled with trying to do this at RoboSub, and I think we can do it for RoboBoat, that we can give them 2 or 3 topics. You know, your approach to visual sensing, your approach to implementation of LiDAR, your approach to whatever a particular sensor system is, and how that it will support accomplishing the task or any task in the competition, and have a very focused topic, and then have a best paper award. And you know, they get the big check, and I don't know if the money goes to the school or the team or, you know, what all, but it could be, you know, that you are an invited person at RobotX Forum the next time. And some award system around a paper that is of a higher quality necessarily than the parts list. Bill?
So let me ask, there's been a lot of discussion about pushing the paper after the competition. What about pushing it before the competition, where it's judged, and like you said, the reward metric maybe will pay for your travel to come to the competition as you were selected as the best paper, and even more so, maybe on the last day you can present this to the rest of the teams. I've seen a lot of feedback by a lot of teams liking this forum, and I wonder if we can capture small aspects of it and apply it to the smaller competitions like BOAT directly.
I really like that. And what I like about that is, you know how after the end of the final competition, the final round, the judges go and they're sequestered for an hour and a half, 2 hours, trying to figure out who won and what the awards are. That gives the students something to do in that intervening period. Attend, you know, that lecture session, and present. That might. I know you guys aren't going to like that, but you know, yeah. It's more content, yeah. Venu? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, my comment on the journal paper, I usually review many of the. Oh, sorry. Thanks.
How many engineers does it take to hold a microphone? Okay.
I have actually reviewed some of these journal papers which came in. When you publish a journal paper, I mean, that really needs to be something innovative. As you really, mentioned, many of these are just parts of components. How did they integrate? How did they test it? So if you really want to have a journal paper, there has to be some innovative, way of doing things. Something different from what others have done it. Otherwise, I don't see a value. Especially, when it goes to a journal paper, I am sure it's not going to go through. And the second thing, I heard a comment that students need to write journal papers. I don't think so. It all depends upon what the student wants, isn't it? A team which participate in a robotics or in other competition, next day you will see him end up in some other job. Doesn't really, the papers are required probably for people who pursue a career in academics, for example, where they see a value, where they are, the contributions are really rewarded. I don't think if you go and work in industry, they value a paper, whether it is a journal paper or a conference paper.
I would like to comment on that. I think that our use of the word journal paper is very general, And in fact, what we are receiving are not journal papers. I would like to elevate the language of journal paper to actually be journal paper,
Yeah.
and the competition requirement be design documentation. You know, something like that that is not necessarily elevated to that. It's a very specific thing, a journal
So
paper.
what I suggest is probably something like a technical report on the competition.
Right.
And not necessarily, I mean, all the teams need not necessarily contribute to it. At least the people who have, come to that level. Say, yesterday we saw 4 presentations. Very nice presentation. Actually, you don't get the same feeling when you go and read the posters over there. Actually, when I came and attended the session where they presented it, it was a different feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, the presentation skill is something which we should inculcate in the students, irrespective of whether it's industry or academics. But from the journal perspective, I have a different perspective on that.
Before we take another question, can we have a comment from the panel? I know you guys are waiting. Go ahead.
Yeah, we're all like raising our hands over here. I think between yesterday and today, one of the things that we keep revisiting is that there's a big difference between the goals of the technical reports that we're requiring. There's what the judges need to see when we're there at the competition and what we think that the students should get out of a design report prior to the competition. But I think there's a separate goal that we want for the students to potentially at least have the opportunity, maybe give them the platform to do something like a journal paper or conference paper after. The problem with getting anything before is you can only expect so much out of a quality before they get to demonstrate the system. So you really can't, like we've been discussing, get a journal paper before the event, because what you actually want, all that data, all the testing, the actual analysis of what their systems were able to produce comes after. So I think it's important to separate what we want and then also realize what we're going to be able to get before and after.
Yeah, and in fact, I would add, that, for example, in ours, the scenario application paper is more to make sure people has read the rules. So they know really how the scenario is about. They have think about the robot they have, if it's able to participate in that one. So it's more, we normally work with teams that busy, last minute. We don't, in a case of RobotX, you have a standard platform that more or less all use. In ours, they come with their own, some have a standard platform. So some of them will start developing things maybe 5 months before, and you sometimes ask for some information, and they will give you this kind of a paper description in which they, by now we have these, we expect to develop these and do that. So it's just to start having a sense of what type of robots they will come. If it with Brink, if it's already like a very big robot or not suitable, you will just give them feedback. Hey, have you think that maybe you will make it waterproof, or we may have these, or so it's just to start guiding them. They start thinking about what they have. You can have scenario application papers really very well detailed, that you know that they are using their robots in research already, so they have some information from some already published papers, something, and some others that are not. It's more on the grad team, and you have, so we have that, and then we expect later on to see, and it's one of the things we want with the ERL, is to see if research, if our type of competition helps them to use it later on in their own experiments. We have had people that were coming specifically to test a sensor or something already. They were coming to and they already were like, well, we are going to write a paper. Can we just test a little bit more later when it's finished? So you have different kind of things. I think, for example, the paper have an award of going to the forum is it's interesting, and it pays off also, and it has a deadline because you need to submit, and it has a reward that otherwise they cannot get, because sometimes you give them money and then, oh, I buy this. I think the experience of going there and in here and meet other people, it's very valuable also for them. So I just.
So, Fausto?
I think to what Marta was saying, I think it's also important sometimes to distinguish the quality of the teams. and even prevent teams that were not ready to come. For instance, we had the ROV team, and we said this is an AOV competition, I'm sorry. Or we had a fake team with fake documents sending papers. So it's also a way of making sure that you have enough good teams, because if you want to, and you have limited time in water, you want to give it teams that are actually ready to go to the water, and not to someone that is actually not at all AUV or is faking their papers or whatever it is.
So we are exploring the idea of these incremental milestones, but we hadn't actually thought to include some documentation other than a video or a declaration that they have achieved X. So I really like what you guys brainstormed and Vladdy put in his presentation, that levels of documentation that could then roll up to, you know, more appropriate documentation that gets closer to that journal status. There's a gentleman in the back that, yeah.
Actually, I had a comment as well,
Okay.
if I can. So for me, as a engineering educator, the presentations and the papers are the chance that I get to make the students actually have to explain why it works. They can put it in the water and they can make it work. They can't always explain why they designed it that way, or why did it actually work this time when it didn't work another time. So the real value I see is most of these competition papers are never going to turn into true journal papers. That's just not going to happen. RobotX is one of the few I think that has an opportunity for some of those to come out. But when I look at it, it's really, that's your chance to see, did they really do the engineering process the way they should have done it? Did they really think through this design, or did they just bolt a bunch of stuff to a boat and get lucky? And sometimes, in the end, yes, it has to work on the water. But it gives an opportunity to see, did they do it right? It also gives an opportunity for teams who, they showed up and they blew up a motor. And they never got a chance to run it on the water because one thing failed. But it still gives you a chance to reward those teams because maybe they did a great job all year. They don't deserve to win if it didn't work, but it gives a chance for that, some of that to get rewarded as well.
Encouragement. I agree with that, and I think that we also have the opportunity with these interim milestones to not just get a video of your boat in the water, but a video of you giving a presentation explaining where you are in the design process. So, you know, that could be part of the video compilation that is a milestone deliverable. I'm sorry, I took your time.
Oh, no, absolutely.
Okay.
I just wanted to make another comment along with all the others that, yes, it is impossible for these kind of papers to become journals as they are, but if we look at a specific system that was developed with a lot of thoughts, with a lot of science behind it, that then was used into RobotX, which is what many schools do. They try to combine research and RobotX. Then potentially you can write a journal after that. If you want, I think what you guys have done for this forum was good in the sense that it seems like you're considering some of these papers for a special edition, and I think that is a good idea. I also think that it's good that you provided feedback from reviewers. That never happens at RobotX and Robot. So a lot of times, yeah, you send in a paper, you're not gonna get anything back. So if you want good quality paper, then there has to be work on the other side as well. I was also impressed with the speed of this process. Usually a journal is not that fast to publish. It takes a year or so. This was all put together, especially the feedback was quite fast, and sometimes it cannot be handled that fast. But I think
I wanna
that's a step in
credit-
the right direction.
I want to credit our paper chair, Vladdy.
Yeah.
That all came from him. He organized all the reviewers, yes. The idea to make it a special journal edition came from Bill Kirkwood from IEEE OES. He worked with his colleagues and made it possible for us to offer that as incentive to get good quality papers. What we brought here was simply the student version of papers because we see that the WAM-Vs are being used for research. I have been tasked by my management at the Office of Naval Research because what I do is manage a portfolio of basic and early stage applied research. And so we want to see research coming out of the utility of the WAM-V. But if it really wasn't for Vladdy, we wouldn't have had that quick turnaround. It's been a great partnership. And this is what Bill Kirkwood was talking about yesterday, utilizing IEEE OES, their resources and the support they can give to help us be successful. I just want to applaud Vladdy. He did a great job. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
As a sort of first-time, brand-new student sort of participant, we ended up kind of studying a lot of the papers to kind of work out what we're even meant to do and how we would even tackle all of these problems, especially because we're all undergrads. We've never done anything like this before. So the papers are really useful for that. And the other thought that I'd had about it is that given it's every 2 years, it's a really good thing to be able to pass down to the next team so that then they can follow on from what you've done and not lose all the stuff you've done, because often you'll have graduated out and then there's just no one there who can fully explain what happened. The other thing that I thought was with the idea of the milestones, that would be really, really helpful, especially when you're first doing it for the first time, just to kind of have markers for where you should be at certain points, and sort of, like, we recognize that we may not be able to participate in the final sort of thing as much as other teams have done it before because we're kind of behind. So also having those things to kind of show, like, stuff that we have managed to accomplish would also, it makes it a lot more full experience.
Good. That's good feedback. I am struck by one of the people that were here said, you know, we hired somebody that was part of the RobotX 2014 team, and they are actually doing the work on the boat that organization now has, based on that experience. The other thing is they weren't the full team. That person has their experience, but they know Joe on their team did this, or Sally on their team did something else, and they can go back, and there's documentation that exists because we've forced this documentation, and they can use it in their future jobs, not just future competitions. So I see a lot of value in documentation. How do we structure that so that it has some utility in the future, so that it supports research, it supports the competition, and it supports professional development later on? Absolutely. All right, last.
Sure, thank you. So I really like the idea of pushing the envelope, and that's kind of what this whole forum has been about. It's introducing...
I just can't get used to that's Travis in the back of the room. Go ahead. Yeah.
It's really my twin.
Yeah.
Now, but so, yeah, the idea of bringing in advanced simulators and making better documentation and, you know, making more challenging tasks, multimodal domain. My concern with that is boxing out some of the teams that aren't going to be at that level. And, you know, for me, I started as a competitor, as an undergrad, and I don't know, for my first team it would have been realistic to fully accomplish all of the things that is kind of being requested. Now, granted, that was for RoboBoat. We're talking about this for RobotX. But is there any thoughts on the panel's part, on anybody else's part, about keeping it open for the newer students? Because while we weren't going to win, you know, the experience of, you know, kind of getting beat up a little bit was invaluable, and I like to think it made us come back the next year stronger for it. And if we didn't have the opportunity to make it to competition and, you know, have our boat not get off the dock, you know, we wouldn't have changed our code to make that not be a possibility the next go around. So yeah, any thoughts on that?
So I understand what you're saying, and so an enforcement mechanism is disqualification if you don't meet the milestones. I don't know that we're there yet. I think this would be an experiment. We're in this for the long haul, and so we want to try different things and continue to tweak them and see what serves the community best. And but on the other hand, if you don't require something, make it mandatory, then what happens? But Tom Curtin and I were talking a little bit about that. So if you submit your video by X date, you show up to static judging with an extra 250 points or whatever, 1,000 points, whatever it is. If you submit it by this date, then you get an extra 500 points. If you don't show up with it until the competition, then you're only eligible for 250 points. Does that matter? Well, if you have a certain lighting condition that you want to run in, and you can select your runtime based on having a high score in those things that allow you that reward, maybe you will do it. I don't know. And we have to see what the response is to our stimuli, right? We don't know. So, Marta?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, Kelly has asked for RobotX. I will ask for, will answer for ERL emergency, but do we have multi-domain? And that was one of the things that were, when we were creating the multi-domain thing, it was one of the worries, like we had expert people in land, in air, and sea, competition separately. But when it comes like, okay, we need to make one of three. Who nowadays has in their research center, university, air, land, and sea? For that time, it was very rare. So it's like you want teams to go. So we found this method of partnership. So in which you could either participate with your whole university thing, or partnership with somebody that, university or something, it's very good in air. The other one is very good in marine, and I'm very good in land. Hey guys, can you just make together one team, and you keep working on that? And this work, it worked in 2015. We help from the part of organization to make this kind of a matching system. Of, oh, we know this one. How about this? So you will find. Yeah. People has their requirements, So people's like, I have this level. I want somebody more or less in my level. Finding also how they can work, the timing of working. It was not easy, but it has been working. Some people also in the in 2015 competition, they met other people that then later on they have decided to, because they saw them perform, and it's like, oh, I like, or they talk and they have something in common, and they create we start creating this community in which people is more keen to participate, and you can focus either on your field, but you also start learning how other fields work, which is also good feedback for you. And I think it worked for us. It has worked, and it's maybe one thing that could be maybe useful in multi-domain. That I was yesterday in the forum, and I think people were still like, not for 2018, but for 2020. Maybe something to think about.
And after you speak, I want to switch the discussion to ask about, because this is an area of subjective judging, how we bring in repeatability, objectivity into some of the static judging areas, and I have a rubric to share with you, and I'm hoping that there's somebody in the back of the room that can get this active so that what's on my screen will show on the monitor behind us. Okay.
Just a quick comment about the milestones and the complex tasks. I think the milestones that you have to be required to do before the competition shouldn't be exactly complex tasks. You should just to show that you are able to do basic stuff. For instance, you can control your underwater vehicle. You know at least how to deal with the cameras or acoustic sensors. Then it's a competition that it has to show that what you really can do at sea. But the milestones are important because you are committed to prepare your robots. Without milestone, you will say, okay, now I have to do this, I will do next week, and so on. So that's important, the milestone. For what concerns the fact that tasks can be more complex, this is true. They can be multimodal, multi-domain, this is true. But I think is that it's how you want to design your competition. That is, if the competition should be for students, you need to give the possibility to new entries to come there, to do something that is a part of the task. For instance, you can have some basic tasks, for instance, passing the gate, and then more complex stuff. So the guys arrive, they are at the beginning, so they will do, for instance, just the first task, but they will be happy because they will have something to bring home, some lessons to bring home. If you want instead a grand challenge, you have not to care about that. That is, this is the bar. If you are not able to go, you will not go. So if we are thinking to have a student competition, you have to give at least a sort of incremental difficulty task to bring, for instance, something that we see is that the improvement over the week of the teams. And when they go back after a week of full work, they are better than when they arrived. That's, I think, one of the objectives of what we are doing.
I hear from professors all the time that students who do internships are some of their better students. Students who participate in the competitions are some of their better students. There's a correlation. I don't know if it's causation. I don't know if those students become better because of their experience, or the better students are going to choose these experiences, but there's definitely a correlation. So we'll leave it at that. I've got this up. Mr. Edwards, who many of you will recall was with us in 2014 and 2016, created this score sheet for the judges to evaluate those static elements. I remember the first year at RoboSub that we required a website. And all I could do was say it was binary. If you had a website, you got the full 50 points. If you didn't have a website, you got 0 points. Because I didn't think we were mature enough in describing to the students what we wanted. It was almost like just have a website. Well, as we got through that, then we started talking to the judges about what are those things that a useful website would need to have, and we came up with these 5 categories. I'm going to switch sites here. Let me see where I get to. Okay. I'm going to try to make this large enough for y'all to be able to see it. So, in overall visual design, don't really pay attention to the points. There were a total of 200 points. This was worth 20, so 10% of your total score. So, is it pretty? Was the kind of thing we were asking. But Mr. Edwards went so far as to create a rubric, that said that in his mind described prettiness. So there was a minimum of information presented. It was organized, it was legible, but that maybe it was illogical, whatever, that you got somewhere between 0 to 5 points. On up to, it was very professional appealing and other aspects of it, so that the judges kind of knew a range of what they might expect to see and how they might value that. There was still some play, and the judges could say, okay, if they did this, there's no perfect, so the most I'm ever going to give is 15. Some judges are like that, but as long as they're consistent with themselves, we have some objectivity in this subjective area. We've never provided this to the students. My question is, do we, by creating this, drive the students to improve, or drive the students to lack of innovation to only answer the test questions as we've designed them? Okay, thoughts?
If you want the papers to be better, give them this.
Okay.
Because the reason you're not getting what you want is students don't know what to write. And what this really becomes is, I've worked with some other competitions where they do distribute detailed rubrics like this. And I have seen in general the quality of the papers are better than they are in the competitions that do not. And what this really becomes as an advisor is this becomes the hammer I have to drive the students to make sure they're actually addressing the right questions.
Okay.
When we have a very vague description, we say, well, did you talk about this? And of course the student's answer is always yes, because I wrote 1 sentence about it.
Right.
If I have a more detailed rubric, I can sit down with the students before it ever gets to you and go through them with this, and I can evaluate them and give them my score, which of course means nothing in the actual competition terms.
Right.
But I can use that to sit down with them and go through it and talk through it. Well, they're really looking for this, 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 and this. Have we really addressed that? Have you really explained how we have addressed these things?
Okay.
So in some respects, yes, you will. It does make the papers a little bit more formulaic, but I think the reason you're not getting what you want is you're not giving them enough of a formula. At least that's my thought.
Okay. We have some students in the back, maybe? Do they feel differently?
I agree with that statement, but also you will get a lot more of the same papers. So if you want variations, then maybe it's better to keep it back. There should be an in-between.
Right, I think we have to be very careful, and Mr. Edwards is really good at telling people in this how they should do something. I think what we want to do is tell them what we want them to do, but how they do it, is more of a systems engineering. Here's the requirements. How you demonstrate meeting that requirement in your documentation can look very differently. Because I really like to encourage creativity. I like students, they're young, they're so used to technology, and they might find better ways to describe what they've done that's more attractive to a younger eye than an older eye. Or we might presuppose that we want it to be attractive to an academic eye, where industry might want it to be more attractive to a marketing opportunity. So how you tell them what you want it to look like drives what it looks like. And are we telling them the right thing? So these are all questions that I struggle with as we prescribe, tell people this. So.
Yeah, and I think that there's a strong difference between a website and the journal paper.
Mm-hmm.
Right, the website should have that X factor and say, there is the room for creativity there. But for the journal paper, if we're talking about making it a technically sound document, there needs to be a formula to follow for that, and having the feedback of how to do that is important. And if you want to train students to be better, train them the right way, so you can give them what the appropriate guidelines are, and the advisors can go over it with them.
Mm-hmm. There are a fair number of scoring factors for each one, and there were many more points for, I think, the journal paper than the other thing. So that was how we announced that we valued that experience for the students more than some of the others. So, yeah.
It was in line with this comment. It's important to have a website and to have all these side things, but for sure, for the team also, it's an extra effort to maybe involve someone from marketing or some other colleagues with experience and with time to do this. And we must make sure that they still focus on maybe the journal paper as a more important thing than just do a pretty website and not actually focus on the technical part. So it's a balance. I'm not sure it's not important. It is, of course, but we need to make sure that they still do the important things and have maybe people specialized in marketing to do the website, for instance.
I wanted to expand on that a little bit, because I think the point he was trying to make is we've seen the teams that are more successful at the papers and websites are the ones that have realized this is not just a robotic competition. So they go to their business schools and they get some business people to help them. They go to their marketing schools and they get some marketing people to help them. I think it takes a few years to teams to realize that. So maybe, it's really hard to make these all required even for new teams, because they're the ones suffering, and it just becomes check the box to make sure we can get in the water. And that's the low quality we get. But then we start to see the teams develop and reach out and then come up with the higher products.
Some of the things I've seen in the Perch competition with some of the local events is you've formed a small company, and tell us how you organized your company, and tell us why we should buy your Perch versus the other Perch somebody else is bringing in. And it's for very young kids, but it gets them thinking about that aspect of what's needed in a company. That not only good people to do good work, but good people to sell your idea. And so that follows along with that.
So I just want to kind of piggyback off of what Travis was saying before, right? We want to promote creativity and a lot of these things and everything, right? But does that need to necessarily be in every component of what we're doing? We're talking about using some of these things as training for the real world, right? Mm-hmm. When you're submitting a conference paper or a journal paper, you're being given more often than not a .tech layout file or class file where everything is specified for you. You know exactly what sections you need to have, exactly what kind of content you need to have, right? So maybe we need to kind of find that balance for RobotX, where we're going to go, okay, the website is where you're going to really get to show off your creativity, and then the paper is going to be something that's very regimented. You know exactly what we're looking for and what the rubric is, and maybe kind of strike a middle ground that way.
The video as well.
And the video.
Yeah.
And to talk about what Bill was talking about too, the idea of bringing in multiple colleges, multiple departments, that I think comes back to, is this a student competition or is this a set the bar competition? Because I know for us, we approach it as a student competition, and the dean of the College of Arts and Science isn't going to talk to me, right? Like I'm just not that important. But I think that if we open it up a little bit more, and either way is fine, right? But if we say this is going to be a set the bar competition, I know we've tried to make it that from our university. We get a little bit of resistance because in some places it's pitched as a student competition. And so the higher ups don't really care to get involved because they say, well, no, this is a student competition. You guys need to handle this. You guys do the marketing. You guys make the contacts. And there's only so far that I can get when doing that. Yeah. So if we do want to go that route, I think making it explicit that that's the route the competition is going would be helpful on our end.
All right, so I have a suggestion for you, and there's a model that Cornell uses, and they're my poster child. They do what is essentially a fraternity rush at the beginning of every year, and they take applications from 40, 50, 60 undergraduate new freshmen to the school, and they pick 10. It's a badge of honor to get picked. And you put in a certain amount of work every week, otherwise you get kicked off the team. And they show up, I mean, they end up with 35, 30, they keep students all the way through. But they assign those freshmen, some of those, they're not true engineers yet. They haven't had a lot of engineering training, but they're smart kids. They're at Cornell, right? As they are at FAU. It just is a way to staff those things that the graduate students shouldn't be spending their time doing, right? Just a suggestion to you. That advice is free. Yeah, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I know this might be a little bit extreme, but is there anybody here at the forum that comes from a business or marketing or art background?
There's only one true industry participant, and he's a PhD hydrodynamicist from MIT, so, but he does understand what you have to do to stay in business. I mean, he's their chief scientist, and
I'm sure.
he's doing a lot of business development.
But I was trying to say that
they're not here.
Maybe we should involve, even on the student level I'm talking about, maybe we should involve somebody on that end. I mean, if this is such an important topic to create a discussion, maybe, and we're talking about involving others, then maybe they should be here as well.
Yeah, I agree. That's an interesting thing, and that's on us. Whoever's in the dinner session tonight, bring that up. Not only bringing the technical students, but bringing those enablers that are also students that can be part of a team, especially since we're advocating that you expand your team to include those other skills that are necessary for successful competition. Sherry?
I know that the forum participants are mainly technical. You should talk to Bumblebee's rep because they bring in marketing students, some of which who have graduated. I mean,
They bring them to the competition.
They bring them to the competition.
Yeah.
So
I don't know who's here, though. Yeah. But I will tell you, every time I mentioned this at a presentation to an engineering department I was visiting, they'd scratch their head and say, oh, we didn't know we were allowed to do that. We didn't even think about that. They're thinking that they have to do everything on their own. And yeah. Yeah. That's true, yeah.
I just want to share, since we mentioned about Bumblebee, because I run the Singapore AV Challenge for the autonomous underwater vehicles. When we started, we actually started giving out $3,000 to the local student teams. Believe it or not, the Bumblebee did not take that money. It was there, I mean, they started creating a team with a marketing personnel. This is from the student itself. And she went on to market and get money from the industry, and they used that money to actually make the vehicle. So I think it's about the model. I mean, right from the beginning, they had technical people dealing with technical things, marketing people trying to get funds, and others doing some publicity for the website creation. So they had everything partitioned among the different team members. So something like the Cornell model. They also invite applications from the graduate students.
I think I got us a little bit off track because this is about judging. But if we want to encourage a certain behavior like that, we need to have a value system in which we evaluate them doing it. I will tell you that when I wanted students to think about a legacy, I challenged everybody to have a robotics program at a high school nearby. And anybody who did that, I would give them 10 Perch kits, and that the next year we acknowledged everybody who did it and waived their entry fee to the competition. So if we reward those things, if we evaluate them and reward them, we can make them happen. Go ahead, Travis.
I was just going to ask if, so for this organization, the way that Cornell runs it, and at Bumblebee, I mean, genuinely, what type of person runs that? Like, I mean, I guess that maybe is a question for Bumblebee, but if you know from Cornell, is it a CEO from business? Is it somebody from the engineering department?
So it's one of the engineering students is in charge of it.
Yeah, there's a person from WAM-V from RobotX. Yeah. So there is a representative from National University of Singapore. His name is WAM-V. He's an engineering student. So
Right.
yeah.
Go run. So there's a student who's really, that's their primary responsibility. You know, and I know when I was at FAU, it was primarily a commuter school, so a lot of people had full-time jobs. They didn't have a lot of time to invest in that, but maybe somebody would still like to feel like they contributed, and that they will go, I'll take on the membership drive. I'm the person that does that. I don't do anything else. You know, I don't know. Vladdy?
I'll go back to the, your
Judging.
score sheet and try to correlate that with in-water tasks. And, I think everyone agrees here that most of these competitions are like really hard exam at school. So, sometimes well-defined, similar to what these kind of templates, guidelines are for partial credit for actual, task that needs to be demonstrated, is something that I want to ask people that compete if they think that would be something that is a good thing. Marta mentioned, task benchmark functionality, task being binary, functionality being more of how you did it. I want to give a specific example for a task that I saw is being considered as an underwater task for RobotX 2018. So there are these rings that are there, and everyone that worked with underwater vehicles knows how difficult underwater manipulation is and what you need to do before you do underwater manipulation. So by just saying, okay, did you bring a ring or not, you don't really offer a possibility for partial credit, which in this case I think it could be explored. Why? Because maybe one ring can be round, one can be square. So someone going down there with a camera and doing the detection of this, and then also classification if it's square or a ring, round ring, they can be awarded something even if they did not bring the ring up. Mm-hmm. So underwater perception and the detection classification in this case is one of the functionality that is awarded.
So I would like to move into in-water performance for the last half hour, and if I can ask our audiovisual assistant in the back to transfer to my laptop again for projection, I will show you what is a challenge for us and why I am so impressed with the task score sheet that Marta showed and what I observed in Piombino in September. Okay, so This is what we have, and this is what I don't, so it says judging element. Let's look at the second one, the task, find the totems. So it's circle a totem. That's an accomplishment, not all the things you had to do to circle the totem. And so you get points for up to 3 of those. If you circled them in the correct direction, for everyone you circled in the correct direction, there's a multiplier. If you circled them in the correct order, there's a multiplier. That speaks to the accomplishment. It doesn't speak to that your maneuvering, your control, your localization, your identification of the color, all kinds of things that you had to do to get that accomplishment. And I think we really need, and Amir's not in here, I'm sorry, but I think we really need to go back to what are the fundamental systems engineering breakdown functions that something would need to do to have a fully completed, accomplished task, and call those out in such a way that there's a very objective partial credit. And that just goes to what you're talking about. So this is one example I have where I don't think we've done it yet.
So I think that maybe the simulator or the whatever the ground station can be used to validate the level of autonomy, right? Because, and maybe that can be brought up as a scoring mechanism of what the fundamentals are. Because you could circle a buoy or go through a buoy with a lucky wind gust. Or, you know.
We've seen that, yes.
Yes. And then the question is, well, how do you make it not subjective of, well, is it running autonomously, or is it, you know, does it look like it's running autonomously? And with a ground station that has a user interface that shows the metrics and all of that, well, maybe it can be broken down a little bit further then and say, okay, well, they have the positive object ID. They've planned a path around that. The controller, the cross-track error is minimized around that path and things like that. And you could get both that way.
So let me ask you about how to judge that, because we do not collect data logs. We don't even have a task that's mapping. And so the fact that you have to map to accomplish the task is just a given, and we never go back and check that. That was something I saw at the first SASE that I was just, wow, what a great idea. I don't know how to implement that with our current structure, but it's worth visiting.
With the judge at RobotX that was assigned to the team, maybe it could just be done real time.
Yeah.
Where if there's a good checkbox where you can say, okay, you know, the team has to show it on their screen, on whatever, on some laptop on the ground.
Right.
There's a display, and they can just run through and check it off as it's going through the challenge.
So when you guys are doing your mapping, in real time, your system is making decisions based on that map. One of the things that they did in Piombino was there was this post-processing because they were actually doing a search task. They were trying to find debris field. They were trying to find certain objects. They were trying to find a worker that had died and been washed to sea, and they were trying to find that person. Now, there's a funny story about that. The mannequin was actually taped to a chair, and this was in Italy. And they said, no, the guy hadn't washed out, that he had made somebody in the mafia mad, and that they had taken him out. But it was funny. But, you know, so they do a lot of post-processing. Could our competition, do we have room for some activity that is post-processing? How do you know that you found 100 false positives, but in your post-processing you know which are the 5 to go back and now get, right? Yeah. Eric, I mean, sorry, Patrick.
Yeah. I was actually going to say very much what he just said, and echoing that for RobotX in particular, for RobotX in particular, we there's a strong desire, I think, to help push the technology. And if the scoring is based purely on did you go through those buoys, the easiest way to go through is buoys, put a waypoint out there.
Yeah.
And the majority of the teams are going to end up taking that approach when something else doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I really like the idea that was that Marta there brought up, the way they broke it down to looking at, there are some things that are, did you do this, did you not do this, did you go through the buoys? But then also possibly adding other scoring elements in that, so maybe there's points for going through the buoys, but then maybe there's points for being able to demonstrate that you actually did that with a autonomous process or using feedback. I think you have to be a little careful how you define that. If you say you must build a map of this, well, somebody could come up with a very valid approach that doesn't rely as heavily on mapping. So you have to be a little careful about that, but I think with the embedded judges, you actually have the opportunity to acquire enough knowledge about the teams, and I'd actually be very interested to hear Vladdy's perspective of how much he thought we were faking versus actually doing, but and how well he thought he could evaluate that. But I think you might have the mechanism in there to be able to make some calls based on information coming back to ground stations or information that's provided to the judges in post-processing or those types of things.
I saw so many issues in reporting tasks previously that I was trying to avoid those issues, but I don't think we're served well. I think we need to fix our issues. And there were two people with their hands up behind you, Bill, and then we'll come back to you, and then we'll get Vladdy to talk. Okay.
So I just want to say along those lines that he was talking about, yes, that would be an amazing thing to test and have points for, but I mean, how is there a way to do that with judges without them looking at our code, basically, right? Which is, I mean, I don't know how familiar you guys are with like writing code yourselves, but even if it's, you know, even if you are familiar, it's going to look like just a bunch of words on a page to you, right? And I think that, or the other way that you test that is manipulating the course, which is what we do for finals now, right? And I think maybe at least for now that's kind of got to stay with that format, that you can do whatever the heck you want to get into finals, but then that's where you're really going to find out whether a team's doing something autonomously or not, when they don't have the chance to go out and maybe collect GPS waypoints or whatever, right?
Right.
My comment was along with Michael's. I agree, it would be nice, but really, how do you judge? And really, what I would not like is to have a judge behind me when I'm doing something. It just makes me uncomfortable. It's equivalent of seeing a customer, watching you work, and asking you questions as they do it when you have timelines.
In Piombino, they have you have to deliver your information post-processed within an hour after the run is complete, and then the judge evaluates that and then comes and meets individually with the team to describe how they're evaluating the map that was created. They're not looking at your code, they're looking at your map. You give them your code so that they put it into their mapping system, it rolls out the map for them, but...
That is wonderful, but then at that point it should be clear that you have to create a map.
Yeah,
You
one
have to
just addition to what Kelly said, you're required to provide two set logs. They're well specified, but one is immediately after your run. You cannot change things. So say this is for underwater vehicle because we don't see anything, murky water, log immediately, and then log one after 1 hour. Judges are experts, and also sometimes they're trained to be able to compare those two to make sure that you did not do anything
to the data that you post-process.
Why should they be different?
Oh, they could be different.
Well, yeah, but
they
that
could
means
be
you did
different,
some.
really. Same thing as you said. You know, if you don't allow someone to look over your shoulder, you know, there are potential to do some things.
Just having submit them right after. Period. There is no reason to submit them 1 hour later because you shouldn't. They should be the same.
No, not necessarily.
No,
For some things, it's
the
different.
data's the same, but the processing, the mapping process.
Okay.
Yeah,
I see.
So the objective of their task wasn't to do something on the fly. It was to provide a map to the responders so they would know where to go back based on data that they had collected.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
But it should be clear into the rules then.
Right.
It
We don't have any mapping tasks in our event. We have your mapping in real time to accomplish a task.
Yeah.
That's
I just want I just want to add to Vladi because they were in charge of the marine, but also when it comes to air and land, you also have your judges when it's teleoperated or autonomous mode. They had also to talk with the judge, like, okay, now we go, for example, in autonomous mode with the aerial, they would just, the safety pilot would go and they would check also that, and if they were having points for building on the map while they were doing the run, just when they come back, you take that information and then they have time to process. So when we defined some achievements that were for autonomy, like when you want to see there if they have been there or not, we also thought about the way and the data we should ask for making sure that we can find out if they have been
Massaging the data.
yeah, or not. If you really have no control on that, and we have no people enough or data enough to show us the difference, then it makes no sense to ask, okay, it needs to be autonomous. If I have never been able to check, then it makes no sense. So we also had different things for different of the tasks to make sure that we minimize that kind of
Yeah, talking with this, it's clear that in the underwater domain, it's easier because the vehicle should be in some way autonomous, even if defining what an autonomous vehicle is not easy. The point is that when you get the data afterwards, but you need guys, so judges, and I think the embedded judges' ideas can be really good for one team to take care about how the data are produced. We were talking about underwater vehicles. You have the mapping, you have all the detections, you can have post-processing with software, for instance, to do a mosaic, for instance, or you can have one guy looking at the screen and say, okay, that's it. So it's not exactly the same. And this is also even more important when you have the aerial or the land robots or the surface vehicles, because in that case, also defining if the vehicle is autonomous or not, you need the one guy behind your shoulder, because we trust teams, but you can have some very smart guys in the teams that they say that it's autonomous, but essentially it's let's say autonomous, but human helped, let's say autonomy. And it depends on what you want. Even if you give multipliers for autonomy, and personally, I'm really keen of giving multiplier for autonomy, because I think that a robotics competition should be essentially an autonomous robots competition. So we should push autonomy, but you have be super sure that if you say that that's autonomous or semi-autonomous, it's really semi-autonomous autonomous. Because otherwise, if you lose the trust of the teams in what you are judging in terms of fairness from one team respect to another, you risk to ruin the atmosphere of the competition, and everything will go bad, because the teams will start to quarrel each other, and I think they should be right to complain about that.
Bill?
I think if we frame this at a higher level, we're talking about, do we judge intent or do we judge performance? And I think the comment that started this is, some teams have seen in finals, something may have happened once that puts an intent into question for how they were judged on performance. And if I can take a moment and put my systems engineering hat on, I'd say maybe an easier solution to go back to judging intent, maybe be focused more on repeatability. If we see repeatability in performance, we can sort of extract intent out of that, as opposed to going down to something that may be more complex for us to implement, of judging intent by some other means of analyzing log files. And I would also sort of argue that even as we go down that path of more complexity, to some degree it still wouldn't be infallible for a team to sort of game the system maybe.
So I'm not sure it came out in the way we gave the presentations, but there's many ways that you evaluate a full spectrum of performance and how you rank that. So like in the Premier League in soccer in Europe, you play all season, and you might lose your last game, but you're still ranked number one because of how you played all year long. That speaks to repeatability. In the United States, American football, you play to a level that's good enough to get into the finals. And if you don't lose any game in the playoff season, then you win the Super Bowl, no matter how, if you had an 8-8 season, right? So, and that's sort of the model that we have for our RoboSub, RoboBoat, and RobotX competitions. There are other models where everything's, how fast did you run the race? That's, there, it's timed and you touch the wall first in swimming or whatever. So what's the right hybrid for us? And, again, because this is multinational, what are the cultural sensibilities as to what's the best way to do it? If we want repeatability, if we want to understand intent as well as performance, it seems it would argue for having a steady performance over a long period of time. Where I think that falls apart was, especially in Singapore, the first year, there were a couple of teams that would go out and map the course, and then they would get on the course and they would run it. And there was another team that said, we're not mapping the course at all. We are mapping in real time, and we are only running it in real time. And they keep beating us on the preliminary score. And we said, don't worry, because we're going to move the course around right before the finals, and their maps will be no good to them. And that's what ended up happening. Their maps were no good to them. But on the other hand, so what's our objective? And do we want to embarrass this other team because now their map was no good? But we wanted, and I don't think because of the language barrier, they really understood we were going to change it. And that repeatable way of running the course, because they had mapped it, they're running autonomously, but they had mapped it, was something that they thought was perfectly fair. And to us, we thought that doesn't really test their mapping ability on the fly and their ability. It's one level of autonomy. We think it's a higher level of autonomy to map as you go and respond to the new map you're creating in real time. Yeah. Right. So that's what I have to say about that, I think.
So I think something that comes out of this conversation that I've noticed, right, is that there's a lot of kind of different viewpoints along this, right? Mm-hmm. And I think maybe that we need to see something coming out of the judging is a clear, focused statement on this, right? What exactly are you guys looking for here? And obviously, I mean, there'll be things that go on with scoring and everything, right? But I think we need a clear like vision statement of what you want out of this competition, because that's going to help us focus on what we prepare for this competition and what we do at competition and how our vehicle hopefully behaves.
I apologize that I am Gumby. I generally like to leave things vague and open so there's room for evolution. And that's my personality. That's not generally an engineer's personality. And I can really appreciate a plea for clarity and framework and format, and I will work towards that. I make that promise to you guys.
Like I said, this isn't even exactly asking for a framework. This is kind of just a clear headline of what you guys are looking for out of RobotX on like a large scale.
Yeah.
Right.
Great.
Well, sorry, I will not answer us what RobotX wants, because I think that's already answered by, and I have no knowledge on that. But for example, when we come to the European Robotics League, when we design our tasks, that's what we want to see. We want to see if people is able to achieve that task or not. So that's what we are aiming for from a team. Then we will see how you perform during the years and how you evolve your team, because we cannot ask the same to all the teams, because we understand people have different budgets, people have different situations. So some teams can perform very well one year and then something changes. Either they change platforms, some people. But it's seen also how, in general, teams evolve and how technology evolve at the same time. Because sometimes we have found out that some achievements that 2 years ago were really, for example, in aerial, very difficult because it was still not the market was still not so developed. 2 years later, it's super easy. You bring, we could see teams bring in already kind of very professional platforms and performing very well. And you could see this 2 years different gap. Also, if you see the technology has advanced a lot, and it's also like cheaper, more people has more access. So in our case, we will set an achievement, set a task we want to see, and we want to find out who can make it, who cannot make it, and how we see it in the different seasons. If having some kind of new technology has helped some teams, or we are still getting the same, you know, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 achievements, and we are all the teams getting into 3. Maybe we need to start thinking about if we need to push in another way. And then basically is that we designed that for our competition is what we want to see. And then when it comes to the leagues, as I explained this morning, we have different local tournaments in which teams can go, so you don't play it if you don't want to all to one go. But with that, what we want is that people understand that they're robots and their team, because at the end, in some cases, it's a robot-human team, performs consistently. So it's not about, oh, I was lucky one day, or because we had that person. You need to find a way in which you can more or less have similar results. I say I come from industry, so I say it that way. You have a product, you come here, you need to do me a demo because I'm going to buy it. You cannot rely on, oh, maybe it work one day. You need to be quite sure it's going, you weren't going to press the button and you're going to do a demo. You don't want this to fall apart. You may have bad luck, and it just turns out that that day you ship it, the courier bring it, and it was broken, and you will need to fix it there. That was bad luck. But you know that if everything, the shipping, everything goes well, you will have it ready in 2 hours for doing a good demo. So we try to have that you will be able with the time to get this robustness and be able to more or less perform and get better.
For the ERL and Eurathlon, we had also for the time it was 1 day challenge, so you have 1 time slot. For SOSI, we found a sort of compromise. That is, you can score points during the week to qualify for the finals, and then the last day you have the finals. The finals counts more respect to the overall scoring, but in this way you can give some weight on the repeatability, because they have all the possibilities during the week to score points, to achieve the task. In the final, you can do that in chain, gaining more points. So in this way, from one side, we try to, to push for the teams to accomplish the task, to give them some rewards. Also, for them it's fine, because if they during the day, even if in the finals they do nothing, but during the week they scored some points, they do something, for them it's a result. And at the same point, we also encourage going at sea, because we have seen that, at least for the underwater world, I think also for the surface water is the same, the more the teams go at sea, and the better it is. Even if for them staying a week at there and being together, focused on the problem, and putting their stuff at sea, even if they fail because they have a leak, that's the usual stuff, it's some good message to bring home. That is, it's something that the next year they will do better. What concerns what we ask for SOSI, we ask task fulfillment like ERL and Eurathlon, but we give also some means how to do that. That is, we encourage them to do, if you have to find a black box, visual and optical, and also the mapping, to have the mapping on the underwater structure. It's clear it's not easy to judge, because to judge a map is a problem by itself, but it's a way to push them to improve every year.
So Sherry has given me the hook, but before we go, I have a crazy idea. I don't know. It might not work, but it might work for our event, not yours, not ERL. But What about like a NCAA playoff tournament kind of thing, where you show up to the competition and you aren't ranked yet, or maybe you are ranked because you've got some ranking based on these interim deliverables. And over your static judging and over your preliminary qualifyings, you get ranked. And now number one is, against number 16 and number 2 is against number 15, but they could still maybe, and so you'd only have to have 15 individual rounds. So we could do maybe head to head 8 on Saturday, and then on Sunday we could do the rest. I don't know. Would that be fun? I'd bet on it. No. Travis has an idea.
That sounds terrifying.
So I'll say, first of all, with that, I think that's going to possibly hamper collaboration more than help it, because suddenly it's much more competitive.
Yeah.
But past that, I think part of that goes again into what are you guys looking for out of this competition? Are you looking for repeatability? Are you looking for, as of right now, it's kind of one-time performance, right? Because the only thing that ends up counting is finals when we get to the end, right?
Yeah.
So, and I know Embry-Riddle's not bitter about it, but in 2014 when they got snagged on an anchor line, that one time kind of ruins your whole shot at getting the big prize at the end, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's almost kind of a philosophical discussion about what the motive is here, and that will help possibly drive how the competition is administered, right? And maybe that's something that we've had two, I think, pretty successful competitions so far. Maybe that's something that needs to kind of be talked about again and see if maybe it changes the shape of what 2018 or 2020 looks like.
Okay, and we'll end with the last student. Okay, and then we'll end with Charlotte. Okay, go
I
ahead.
think your idea is great.
Interesting.
I love competitions. I think that's what the whole
So-
purpose of being here is. So it's pushing technology. Personally, if I see somebody that's better than me, I want to do better than him.
So maybe a hybrid for 8 making into the finals, and then that's how we handle the repeatability aspect of those that made it into the finals.
And
Yeah.
if I can suggest something, maybe the ones that get the better score and getting into the final, maybe they might choose the tasks that are gonna be run, so they have that kind of advantage, and maybe so you have a semi-final because it'd be one against the other.
Yeah.
You don't have the time to do all the tasks, so maybe you do just 2.
Yeah.
And and another thing I was thinking again, a little bit out there, would be after a few years, do like a World Cup. So like the best US team, the best Japanese team, the best European team.
We got very lucky. We got very lucky in Singapore. In Singapore, we got one team from each nation, and that was without any kind of just picking the a team based on its nation and putting it into the finals. All of the 6 teams that qualified for the finals represented all of the nations. That didn't happen in Hawaii. So, and in fact, I think the one team that didn't make it in had made it in Singapore. They were totally unprepared, and they would not have welcomed the opportunity to compete in the finals. They couldn't make it through the gate till the final day. So yeah, it was just where they went. We are almost done. Charlotte is going to say the last word, and Fausto is going to say whatever he was going to say okay.
Some people like to compete, of course, but it depends of if you want competition as an opportunity to train the students or to make him actually compete and win something. So
Yeah.
not everyone is like him, maybe.
Right.
So it depends on what your goal is, actually. If
Isn't
you're-
it wonderful we're all different just like everybody else? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
I think the only thing that we don't want to lose track of was the repeatability notion that Bill brought up, and kind of what you were saying about bringing points from the qualifying rounds into the finals. There's some concept there that could be explored by the judges or the planning committee about a weighting factor to your final performance score based on the success rate during the week. That could be a really great way to bring in how autonomous, how repeatable, how reliable are you without merging both somehow, or there's an idea there that maybe should keep rolling through the RobotX side of things.
Great. I really appreciate your sticking with us and offering your thoughts on the questions that we had, asking your own questions. I want to thank the panelists once again.